Hello everyone! Now we move to the fifth round of the Tata Steel Masters Tournament and we look at a game between Param Maksudlu and Ding Liren. Let's check it out. e4 and e5, knight f3 and knight c6, bishop c4 and knight f6, g3 and bishop c5. So main line in the Italian, c3, d6, a4, a5, bishop g5 and h6. Bishop h4, queen e7, white castles, and bishop a7. Knight bd2, bishop to d7, rook b1, and g5. It's important to note that black has not committed the king to the king side yet, so there is some flexibility over here, whether it goes to the king side or to the queen side. Knight takes g5 would be a terrible mistake because after h takes and bishop takes, there's rook g8. h4, castle's queen side now. Queen f3 is met by rook into g5, h takes and knight g4. And black will have an excellent game. The g5 pawn will be picked up, the rook will come to the h file, and there will be a lot of pressure on white. So it's important to know that when the king is not committed to the king side, then you can't just sacrifice a piece. So bishop g3. Now king side castles, rook e1, g4. Well, this gives a little bit of initiative to white actually, and Maksudlu grabs it with bishop h4. G takes f3 and queen takes f3. So there will be pressure on the knight. King g7, knight f1. Rook to h8, maybe some ideas of h5 and rook h6. Knight to e3. Rook af8, just securing the f7 pawn. And it's important to note that knight d5 does not work immediately because there's knight into d5, and if bishop into e7, then knight into e7 is very good for black. Black now has 3 minor pieces for the queen, all good, and they will coordinate sooner rather than later. So after knight into d5, you'll have to play queen g3 to defend that bishop on h4 first, king h7, and then e takes d5, threatening the knight and the queen, f6, d takes c6, and black can throw in rook hg8 here. Bishop takes, rook takes, queen f3, and bishop takes c6, and there's pressure on g2 as well, so queen f5 getting out with check is important, and rook g6. This is an equal position even though white has the exchange, but the two bishops are placed very well for black, and black can hold this. So knight d5 does not really give any advantage. What white really needs essentially is a waiting move which forces black to make some move and compromise on some aspect of his position. Well, king h1 was played, but there was something slightly better in rook bd1. The rook is slightly better on the d file because it can support d4 than on the b file. And now let's say h5 because you want to play rook h6 up to defend that f6 knight. Queen g3, king h7, knight d5 now is better. Knight takes, e takes, f6, d takes c6. Rook hg8 here is a problem because now the h5 pawn is hanging, remember. So after the same variation, queen f3 and bishop c6, you have queen into h5. This is very different. You get out with check, and black will have to go in front of that rook, so g2 will not be threatened, so it doesn't work. So after d takes c6, bishop takes c6, and you can play d4 for instance, opening a diagonal, the b1 to h7 diagonal also, so that is possible, and white would be slightly better here. And after rook bd1, if let's say black were to capture this knight, then you open up the f file and things will happen there. So let's say h5 now, queen g3, bishop g4, and rook f1. Rook h6 is forced, and h3. You'll earn your piece back and you'll have some pressure. If let's say rook g8 were tried, that you want to move the king to the h file and use the g file, but then knight f5. Bishop takes, queen takes, Again, there's a lot of pressure there. The king can't move yet, so knight b8 coming to d7, but king h1 now. Knight b d7 and d4. There is pressure in some form or the other. You can even push it to d5 later on, so and the rooks can come up the board as well. So white would be quite happy. The best case would be h5, and that gives a little something to bite on for white. However, king h1 was played, and this is slightly different. We'll have the same line essentially with h5 and queen g3, king h7 and knight d5, knight takes, e takes, f6, d into c6, bishop into c6, and here d4 was played actually. But if we just look at this with that previous variation, the rook being on b1 versus on d1, on d1 it's slightly better, because then it can also come to d3 in some lines, and it of course is supporting the d pawn. That's an added benefit. Another interesting way to play this could have been queen h3. Maybe the queen goes to f5, maybe the bishop lands on e6. Let's say queen g7, putting pressure on g2, bishop e6, queen g6 and f3, blocking that c6 bishop, f5 and bishop b3. Let's say rook e8, but then d4. And there's no good way to capture this because bishop e7 would be very strong. Rook e6 is a threat, queen into h5 is a threat. E4 would be met by rook g1. You can't capture on f3 here, so e3, let's say, preventing any opening up of lines, but bishop c2, and you put pressure on f5 now, and that e pawn will not be easily defended. The other rook can come to e1 finally. So let's say d4, rook hf8 would have to be played, something like that, and rook bd1. Now the rook can come here and support d4. That's also possible, and it would favor white slightly, but d4 was played anyway. Queen g7 here and bishop d3, king to g8 and rook e3. It does seem that the bishop placement for black means that there will be some counterplay because g2 is a bit sensitive. E takes d4 was played here, and queen into g7, king into g7 and rook g3. There really is no advantage left for white here now. There could have been some chances if there had been the previous variations, but that's what chess is all about. A slight difference can be all the difference in the world. King f7 and rook g6 going after f6. There's no decent defense for that. Rook hg8 was played, but rook into f6 comes with check, so there's no time to grab on g2. And it's important, you cannot go to king to the e file at all because rook e1 is coming. And black can't hide because king d7 is met by bishop f5. c8 is taken away, so king d8, and then you have a beautiful rook into f8, checkmate. Double check, the king has nowhere to go. So after king g7, after rook into f6, king g7 had to be played and the moves were repeated. So, and rook f6, and then the players agreed to a draw because it's going to be a threefold repetition, neither side can deviate. But it was a very interesting game nonetheless, and there was a moment in which Paramagsudlu could have had a slight advantage and maybe pressed more. That's why I wanted to show this game. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon for the next game.